Personality traits, when looking at our kids, generally a lot of it's genetically inherited. So don't be surprised that you're educating your younger self. I oftentimes my eldest daughter, yeah, man, it just hits me every now and again of like, wow, you were like really like me. Yeah, it gets a little disturbing sometimes, just like how it's a little version of me in this kid. I got a lot of compassion from my mom, going through those sort of experiences, but more or less, it almost being on the same page personality wise is a big deal. It does make it more easy for us to relate to our kids that way. But a lot of kids, one or two, again, in bigger families, this will come up, is we'll have the black sheep. He does have a different way of looking at the world, a different way of thinking. And so there's been a lot of research, in trying to figure out, what makes up a personality. A couple different labs did a lot of work, and there's been stuff that's been put out there before, but there's one assessment that actually has a strong research backing to it, and it's called the Big Five of Personality Assessment, where basically different research labs around the world more or less came to the same conclusions that people have 5 general personality traits that interact with one another, and they're distinct, but they also very much also play into and feed into one another. That is almost kind of like your personality fingerprint. And there's 5 different aspects, 5 different traits that go into this. Openness, and the way I should kind of back up the trait a little bit. The way this assessment kind of works is you kind of imagine like a 100-point scale where there's a line, 50, right in the middle, separates between above 50 means you're going to be more of that trait, and below that 50 mark you'll be less of that trait. So for example, openness is one trait where a person can be very open to ideas, or it's more of a male aspect, as it turns out, like playing with ideas, but maybe more of what seems more predominant with assessments with women is women are just as open, but they're more open with aesthetics, with more gregarious, more open to experience of feeling. Not to say they have different feelings. Men and women do have the same feelings, but there's a different sort of I guess a kind of a color to it, a more openness to those experiences. So there's openness and conscientiousness. That's a kind of an interesting personality trait, of this sort of drive of being industrious and orderly. Another trait is being an extrovert. It's almost kind of like the way you can look at being an extrovert as opposed to an introvert is, do you feel charged after going to a party or spending alone time with yourself? I'm right on the cusp there. I'm a little below 50. I'm more of an introvert, so I can tolerate parties, and I've done a lot of work to try and, at the very least, not look like I'm suffering to put off the rest of the rest of the party guests. But I personally get more out of just kind of sitting with myself and a good book or learning, thinking again, very very openness to ideas, thinking thoughts. I'm more energized from doing that sort of thing. There's agreeableness. This character trait is more like it's not a part of it's being polite, but also like the sense of empathy and wanting to kind of put yourself out there, putting other people's needs before yours. And the last would be neurotic. It's a nice term. I think a better way of labeling that one is threat sensitivity. How sensitive are you to threat? And again, there's various levels. It's worth noting, there are variations in gender when it comes to personality, and they're not large. They're small to medium effect differences in all of these, but on the whole, as a general rule, it turns out that men are more disagreeable, and men, like I said before, men like playing with ideas more than openness to aesthetics. whereas women are more agreeable. And also they're more threat sensitive. And it's actually kind of like getting into the research a little bit, like, well, why that might be. And a lot of people kind of put forward originally that, well, it's probably social factors. And it's true that social factors do mediate how these personality traits are expressed. But what ended up happening in the research coming out was the exact opposite of what people thought. Especially now here in Europe, countries like Sweden, Norway, but you see this also in the United States when you compare it to non-Western countries, is that the more freedoms a person has to pursue their interests, even to such extremes as, say, more in the Nordic countries, they make it government policy to try and, make 50-50 nurses, 50-50 lawyers, try and get, parliament should be 50 male 50 female, percentage wise. They really put a lot of social engineering into try and evening the playing field, so to speak. What ended up coming out was the more that you enabled both men and women to pursue the things they wanted, well, the wider the gender differences became. It was really cool. So, it's kind of funny to think about, we'll say Iraq, where, it's classically, people kind of think as Iraq or, other Eastern countries as being more male dominant, more masculine. Well, the gender differences are actually much smaller in those countries. So it's worth noting, being more sensitive, say, with your daughters, and being aware that, daughters are going to be more agreeable. They're going to want to be more helpful. And that they are going to be more threat sensitive. So you kind of have to be sensitive to that, especially dads. You dads out there, to be sensitive to that fact that the world they experience, on a fundamental level, may very well not be the one that you are. And there's nothing right or wrong about it. And what I kind of like about the big five is, kind of people look at this list as, agreeable. Well, that must be good. You want that character trait, or, oh wow, watch out for neuroticism. That sounds bad. It's really not true. Each has a dark side to them. Because take agreeableness. I'm very agreeable. Pretty high scores for that, and it's something I have to work on because, as funny as it sounds to work on being agreeable, the trade-off with being agreeable and being helpful, being empathic, but also kind of giving up what you'd rather do, well, that's a great way of breeding resentment. And on the flip side, being threat sensitive, well, maybe it is a good idea to tread more carefully. And somebody who's not so neurotic, well, maybe they're going to get themselves in a lot of trouble because they're not being careful enough. So none of these traits are positive or negative. They really do have their trade-offs. They're kind of getting back to what, the underlying explanation for these traits, especially gender-wise, the differences. It almost kind of seems to be with women. I mean, I hope this isn't, I'm not shattering anybody's conceptions of women, but women create life. Their bodies are designed for it. I mean, the hip structure is designed for it. Women have babies. They feed babies. They make sure babies survive. Everything about the mother is about that. And so there's one way researchers kind of look at gender differences is, well, men are more, personal agents, more, me, myself, and I. But women, they can't be that way. Women are more I with. And that's reflected in being more agreeable because you're taking care of a kid who, man, is a pain in the neck to. I can't believe how my wife gets through that. With getting through the night, feeding the kid, not wanting to use the bottle. It was a really big deal for her, something she really stood on. And well, when you're taking kids, you also have to be more threat sensitive because it's not just you on the line. You have a lot more to lose. So it's worth being a little more threat sensitive as a woman. So I guess I'm kind of getting lost in the details here, but it's worthwhile to think about these things because, well, how we see the world in large part is based on our personality traits. It almost kind of filters what we see. And it's worth noting, especially with dealing with with our kids who are the opposite gender to appreciate that fact. So you can kind of, reorient yourself as a parent a little bit, especially if your kids are high in being threat sensitive. Maybe they suffer a little bit from anxiety. Or, maybe your kids are a little too open. And well, you have to, it's their personality, and being too rigid to keep them from being curious. Well, you can't put out that fire, but you have to maybe keep a closer eye on kids who are more curious. My oldest son here, is a very curious kid. Very curious. He's always talking, always sharing stories with people, always trying to figure out what other people are about. And that's good, and you learn a lot. But you might learn too much. And so it's worth kind of seeing how your kids come out in these sort of assessments. And you can kind of, like me, your kids, you can kind of fill it out for them, or if they're old enough, have them take the test themselves. And that could be really helpful in orienting yourself to your kid on that basic level.